Hi guys, welcome to our webinar today. Slightly different setup. I'm just the interviewer today because we've got Tony as our special guest from RSA. Tony is a Chartered Fellow of IOSH and a Chartered Member of the CIPD. He's the Chair of the IOSH Financial Services Group and a Trustee of IOSH, as well as a Mental Health First Aid Instructor. He's worked in mixed HR and health and safety rules for the past 17 years, providing reasonable adjustments for people with mental health issues, as well as policy setting for various elements of health and safety, and just an all-round good bloke. So Tony, thanks so much for helping us today and presenting the webinar with me. What are we going to talk about today?
Hi, 17 years, it makes me sound old, doesn't it, doing that many years of real
Just super experienced.
Yeah, indeed. So yeah, today we're going to start with a little bit of a presentation, which hopefully is going to get people asking questions. So I'm hoping we'll only use maybe around half of the time that we've got to do the presentation, but which will leave us with plenty of time to ask questions. Maybe even if you want to ping in some best practice, if you want to. I'd keep it brief, so obviously we can share it. But yeah, any examples that you do in your workplace. So to start off with,
send that through, and I'll read it out to Tony if you've got any questions, guys.
Cool. So yeah, we're going to start with a look at the Thriving at Work report, which is a new report that came out last month, in fact. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about, we'll reflect how that potentially impacts your existing stress policy, or maybe even if you're writing a new one, maybe you want to take into account some of the things that this report says. And I'll also talk about some of the things I've done over the years in terms of supporting the employers that I've worked for, and I've been a consultant as well, so in supporting clients in previous roles as well. And that will include throughout. Yeah, definitely. And throughout, I'll probably mention mental health first aid, because as we said, I'm a mental health first aid instructor.
Which, to be honest, until you mentioned it the other week, I hadn't heard that was an actual thing. So I'm really interested to find out a bit more about that.
Yeah, great. It's something we can definitely talk about. I'm certainly very passionate about, and certainly the impact that it's had in terms of opening the conversation on mental health is massive, and obviously I know other instructors that are getting the same in their workplaces as well. So yeah, I suppose I should say I don't work for Mental Health First Aid England, or the organisation.
You're not on commission.
No, I'm not. Nor I'm sort of empowered by them to talk about it. It will just be my reflection as an instructor and someone that delivers the course, and it has been absolutely positive in every instance that I've delivered it.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
So starting with Thriving at Work, it's a new report. I certainly aren't going to go through it in too much detail because it's 80 pages and you would be bored to tears listening to me read out 80 pages. But I'm trying to tease some of the things that health and safety practitioners and even HR practitioners will be interested in from the report. It's very well written. It's really, I think it's really good. I think it's actually really positive, and I would definitely suggest. Obviously, you can get it online. You can Google anything nowadays. But yeah, it's readily available for anyone that wants to download and read it. It's very easy to read, very accessible. So it's an independent.
Where can people access it? Just on the government website?
On the government website. If you Google Thriving at Work, and as you can see on the picture there, the Stevenson Pharma Review, if you type that in, you'll go straight to it.
Brill.
One of the first things it says, the UK is facing a mental health challenge at work that's much larger than we had thought. I actually think it's literally one of the first sentences, which shows you just how much of a surprise it's actually been to the professionals when they've started to look. And the approach that they've taken is that the correct way to view mental health is that we all have it. Now, certainly I talk, and when I deliver mental health first aid training, I think some people have the perception that with mental health, you're either broken or you're fixed, and once you're broken, you're kind of always broken, and you'll never get fixed again. It's nice to hear that that's the case, but obviously what we're trying to do is to move people away from that and to get them to understand that actually mental health's a continuum. It's more like physical fitness. So I'm standing here today relatively unfit, but if I there's honesty for you. If I went out and tried to concentrate on improving my fitness, it could improve. Then if I didn't concentrate as much, then obviously I would slip back into being as unfit as I am today.
Yeah.
It is absolutely the same for mental health. It fluctuates, and you can have open conversations. You can talk to people about the mental health in the same way as the physical health. You're not going to make people worse by opening up that conversation. In fact, it's massively powerful and it's massively beneficial to do that. And that's the approach and the vision that the Thriving at Work report has. To do it comes with it gives you some suggestions, and amusingly it comes with 6 core standards, which everybody who works in health and safety is going another 6 core standards, because we have 6
that's
standards.
The favourite number.
It must be, yeah. So there are obviously 6.
Few. 5's too few, 7's too mystical. It's got to be 6.
Absolutely. And yeah, obviously the HSE has the 6 management standards, but these 6 core standards go beyond that. And indeed, I'm going to show you some recommendations that the report actually has for the HSE. I will at this point say I really like what the HSE have done in terms of what they have available. They obviously have some really good resources. They have a policy that you can effectively pull download and make your own. They have obviously risk assessment advice, infographics and everything on the website. It's really, really good. But this report really, what the difference I think it makes is that it acknowledges that you manage the whole person, whereas the HSE, as you would expect, focuses on people at work. Obviously everything they do is through the Health and Safety at Work Act. Therefore, they very much focus on things at work. Where this report goes a bit further is it says actually people come into work and you've got to manage that whole person. They bring in everything that goes outside of work with them, but you've still got to manage that person.
Whatever they bring in.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, it has 6 recommendations which I've put up here. So the first is produce, implement, and communicate a mental health work plan. Very much sounds like a policy, that one. Yeah. The second, develop mental health awareness among employees. Kind of sounds a bit like delivering training. Yeah. The third, get people talking about it, open and encourage conversations about mental health, and also the support available inside work. You might have things like EAPs and occupational health, and also outside work there are various charities that you could signpost people to. Yeah. Obviously, provide your employees with good working conditions, promote effective people management, and routinely monitor employee mental health and well-being, which very much sounds almost like the old accident records that we all and statistics that we all look at and love. Yep, definitely. So
these aren't your must-dos, are they? Are these just recommendations from the review?
Yeah. So what the review wants to do is over the next decade, over the next 10 years, to try and get these out to employers. What it recognises, and as I said, I'm not going to read the report out, but it recognises that employers themselves are recognising that mental health is an issue, but they actually don't know what to do. So they've come out with these 6 core standards, and within the report as well, I'll flash up one of the quotes, but it's actually it's looked at other industries. In fact, a friend of mine, Sean Atkins, is actually quoted in the report. He works in the construction industry. So it's not just kind of focused on, I'm obviously conscious I work in the financial services industry, you know, it's not all about office workers and mental health there. It literally covers every industry.
Could be any single workplace. Every workplace has its own stresses, doesn't it, and its own, you know, every person's an individual, and where you work, you know, mental health doesn't what's the word? Doesn't pick
discriminate.
Discriminate. That's that word. I can't think of on a Friday afternoon.
we absolutely all have mental health. Mental health is who we are. Some days it's great, and some days it isn't. One of the quotes I'll come to, actually, I'm not sure No, it's not the next slide yet. It might be the one after, actually, as I'll point a quote from somebody that actually contributed to the report, and I actually really like what they have to say. But before we get to that, so obviously the report has some recommendations, those 6 recommendations, but it also kind of gives the HSE and sort of the legislative bodies as well a kind of a call to arms to maybe step up their game slightly. Like I say, I think the HSE does a really good job in terms of the resources that they have, but the report's saying maybe we can do even better. So the first, they recommend that they revise the guidance to raise employer awareness of their duty to assess and manage work-related mental ill health. Right. They also recommend that they look at the risk assessment guidance and the management standards to see how they can maybe broaden those. And as I said, it's very much the management standards. Obviously, they're focused on work, but we manage the whole person. So maybe what can we do to broaden that? They also, and certainly, I think this one will be maybe a challenge. They recommend that the HSE increases the focus on workplace mental health and safety during its inspections. I can imagine that being quite difficult. I'm sure somebody's looking at that at the moment. Yeah. They recommend that obviously local authorities from their public health and enforcement roles does the exact same as in terms of those 3 points. And also that the government considers legislative change to really enhance what the employer can do for mental health and the conditions. And then if they do legislative change, the last one obviously is that then the Equality and Human Rights Commission, from an enforcement point of view, maybe wants to increase what they do, certainly where people are discriminating against individuals.
Well, so, on the grounds of their mental health condition or anything that they might be suffering with.
Yeah. So if they're discriminating against anybody on mental health, then then the relevant amount of enforcement should take place.
Yeah, with the recent stuff in the media, what is it? One in 6 people that disclose mental health lose their jobs as a result of it. Was a recent report, wasn't it? So
yes,
action definitely needs to be taken to some degree.
Absolutely. So within the report, it actually says around 300,000 people with a long-term mental health problem lose their jobs, which costs the UK economy 99 billion, and 42 billion of that cost of that is borne by the employer. So yeah, there's massive costs, and obviously a lot of people.
Staff.
Yeah, definitely. Equally, what is interesting within the report, it says that 15% of people at work have symptoms of existing mental health conditions, and so that to me, so 15% of the workforce have symptoms, and they are still in work. That actually really shows us that an employer is potentially already doing things to support people, and we are in a position to be able to support people.
Yeah, why wouldn't you as well?
Yeah, definitely.
Wicked.
So here's a quote I mentioned that I quite like. So everyone is somewhere on the mental health spectrum. I really like that. I tend to think I hear spectrum, and as someone who has an autistic daughter, that kind of resonates with me in terms of the differences in people. I also like the word spectrum because it makes you start thinking about, certainly me, it makes me think of a prism and the different sort of light that a prism throws. Yeah, definitely colours, and some day you're kind of a light sunny colour, and other days you're effectively a darker colour. And it kind of, I use the fitness analogy because it's nice and easy to understand, but I really like that as well. Yeah. And also the last sentence here, creating a positive environment for mental health demonstrably costs less than failing to do so.
It's just put in simple terms, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And mental health isn't going away. Yes, we can ignore it. Some people worry that they start having the conversation and it makes things difficult. I personally don't think that's the case. And talking about it can actually effectively be massively powerful for that person and really help you as an organisation to get to grips. I mean, if I was to throw out some stats to go with this, so business in the community have also they tend to do. They obviously tend to do reports as well. They did a mental health at work report in 2017, and they said that 84% of managers feel that employee well-being is their responsibility, but just 24% have received training in managing an employee with a mental health issue. So there's a massive.
So they know they've got to do something, but they're just managers are at a loss to know exactly what to do with their staff. And I definitely see that when I go to clients. People know that they should be doing something to do with mental health and well-being, but what do you do? How do you start? They don't want to. They feel like they're going to be opening a big can of worms or Pandora's box, and then they're not going to know what to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And funny enough, they did a report in the previous year, and what they said is there's a disconnect between goodwill and capability. So there's plenty of goodwill in terms of leaders and managers wanting to be able to do something, but the capability to do it isn't necessarily there because they've not had the training.
They don't have the tools to manage it. That's sad, isn't it?
It is, yeah, definitely.
There you go.
So that kind of gives us a little. As I said, I'll be nice. I'll be nice and brief in terms of the report. Certainly, that it's an 80, it's either 80 or 84-page document that I didn't want to read
Some
through.
Nice bedtime
in
reading.
Its entirety. Yeah, indeed.
We can all go through it at our leisure.
Yes, absolutely, and it's well written, and I think obviously it's not legislative, but I think it's a good indicator really of what we want to do and the line that we should be taking in terms of what we do in our own workplaces. It's a nice guide in that respect, and obviously the stats that it gives are very good when you're going into your own workplaces to talk to different stakeholders about what we need to do and the benefits of it. It also has some really great case studies. Thames Water are in there. They actually, the reason that jumps to mind is they do mental health first aid courses, so obviously someone that delivers that as well. I noticed that. It has quotes from the likes of the Institute of Directors in there as well. So yeah, it's got some really good, interesting stats and some really good case studies. And that kind of leads me to a question. So I'm not, when I talk about policy over the next few slides, I'm certainly not going to go into the mechanics. As I've said, if you wanted a policy and all you want to do is sort of use something that somebody else has suggested, the HSE website is the place to go.
What? You're not going to tell us exactly how to do it? You're not writing our stress policy for us, Tony?
No, not at all. And
okay.
I'm deliberately going to ask, do we need a stress policy? So far, all I've talked about is mental health. I've not actually talked about stress, and we tend to, when we write policies, and yeah, people can disagree and feel free to send comments in disagreeing with this, but yeah. as a health and safety practitioner, you tend to go, what does the legislation say? What do the approved codes of practice say? I might have a chat with one of my mates in terms of what their policy looks like, and then I'll draft myself a policy, then start having a chat with the stakeholders after, and then we'll probably maybe even go through union consultation, then we'll get the policy in place, and then we'll start talking about how we embed it. And I don't think you need to do that with a stress policy. I think we can ask questions like, do we need one? Does that stress policy, is it a mental health policy? Especially if you've got one and you're reviewing it, do we say, actually, let's broaden this out, as the Thriving at Work report said, and do we think, let's have a policy that looks at mental health? Some organisations you'll find you've got a stress policy and a wellbeing policy. Well, if you've got both of those policies, do you need both? Do you move to one? Do you move from both of them to a mental health policy? I don't think there's any right or wrong answer to that. I think it very much needs to reflect your company culture and all your company values. I think without thinking about those company values, you're possibly just writing a policy that potentially will sit on the shelf. I think as we review it, we can definitely think about those 6 core standards that the Thriving at Work report has given us, and think how we can change and what we can do. And I think certainly if you're writing a policy from scratch, the way to do it with a stress policy, unlike all the other health and safety policies, and I do think this one is very different, I think you need to sit down with your key stakeholders and really ask a question. What are we up for? Are we up for anything? And what you're up for, so to speak, so what kind of adjustments can we do? What kind of extent are we going to go in terms of supporting our employees?
So rather than think, how far you're willing to go.
Yeah, definitely. So usually we think about the strategy first, and how that complements the business. And I think with either, whatever you want to call it, stress policy, mental health policy, well-being, or all of them, if they cross-reference, rather than thinking strategically, I think you need to start with, like, what are we going to do in the business? What kind of things can we do to support people? And you might even have multiple answers to that, where different business areas are in different positions based on the roles to support people. And I think you want to sit in a room full of all your key stakeholders and have a nice, open conversation that says, what are we up for? Because then from that, we can actually pull a policy together that reflects what the organisation's appetite is and resources are in relation to that support, rather than taking the HSE management standards and going, right, I've printed a policy off the website, let's use that as an example and let's go from there. So I think it's a very different conversation with stress.
You need to make sure it's the right fit.
Absolutely, yeah. And that right fit needs to kind of tick the boxes in terms of your company culture and resources.
Yeah.
So that leads me neatly onto the fact that, quite literally, you can decide what's in that. Yes, you will use the HSE, all the good work that they've done. You can use that as a benchmark, but you need to think about the type of work you do, what kind of resources you need, what kind of resources you actually need to go out and give to your leaders and your line managers. You need to think about things like your performance management system should complement it as well. I know we all kind of groan when we think about performance management systems, but I've gone from organisations that have them to one that doesn't, and then not at the moment. We have a very good one at my workplace. But if you move to an organisation that doesn't have performance management and things like appraisals, you actually genuinely miss them, and think, you know, what shows me that I'm actually doing a good job.
Right.
You want to think about your appetite for reasonable adjustments. What kind of reasonable adjustments can you make? And this is something where I think back to the fact that leaders aren't, only 24% have received training. I think sometimes leaders struggle to be able to know what they can do, and they worry that saying to an employee, rather than you going on long-term sickness, actually there's a massively beneficial factor for you being into work, especially if the mental health isn't work generated. Actually being in work, but me relaxing your performance standards, or me saying to you that, you know, you don't have to come in all the hours every day. You know, maybe come in an hour or two every day, or come in every other day, or whatever those adjustments. Yeah. Whatever those adjustments look like, if you can stop a person going from short-term to long-term sickness, you can effectively do, it's sometimes called vocational rehabilitation, so you can assist somebody in work to stay in work through being actually flexible enough to accommodate the needs that they may have.
Brilliant.
And that leads me on really now to kind of talk about sort of my experiences. So I've done, in different organisations I've worked for, we've had stress policies, we've had stress and well-being, we've had mental health policies. As I said, there's no right or wrong answer, but certainly at the moment as a mental health first aid instructor, one of the things I'm seeing that massively opens the conversation, and obviously you're delivering this training. The training effectively does what it says on the tin. It's first aid for the mind rather than physical first aid. It gives you the ability to signpost people to the relevant support they need, but the really important thing that it does is it opens up a conversation, and that conversation can actually be massively powerful in terms of that person then being able to understand that there's hope potentially for recovery, that recovery is likely, recovery is possible, that what they're feeling is normal. I often see, certainly when I've delivered the training, you see a light bulb moment with the people that come along that goes, where they say, actually, you know what, I had some fear about talking to somebody about things like self-harm or thoughts of suicide, but you know what, I'm not going to make it worse by talking to people. Actually, through talking to them, I can help. And even that conversation, the fact that I'm taking the time, I'm showing that I'm interested, that alone, that alone can have an impact and there's, yeah, you're showing genuine interest, and there's the human attachment there of having a conversation to help that person. And one of the things, in fact, the first course I delivered with a friend of mine called Martin Power, who he stood there and said, he said to the class, if all that happens from this course is that one of you helps someone with a mental health issue, that you have a conversation that you otherwise might not have had, then this course has been worthwhile. And it actually, I've effectively said the exact same thing in every single course I've delivered by myself since, because it is absolutely where you want to be. If all you do is help one person, then that's great. But to be honest, the impact I'm seeing when we deliver this kind of training, it doesn't have to be this. Obviously, whatever fits you culturally, to get the conversation started, to train people, to give them the ability to have that conversation, it has a massively positive impact on everybody that engages in it.
Yeah, I agree. Making it open for people to chat.
Yeah,
has a big
definitely.
impact, doesn't it?
And that, like I said, I wanted to start this with a little sort of scene setting of, that here's a new report, have a think about what you want to do for a policy, and here's a very brief introduction on things like mental health first aid that you can do in the workplace, and that is it. So I kind of want, hopefully we've got some questions.
Yeah, we do have a couple of questions. So Maria wants to know, what are the implications for Scottish employers?
So, and certainly from what I've seen in terms of Scotland, NHS Scotland has, to use Dr. Google, it has an instructor's course in Scotland, which is pretty much the same as the rest of the as the other one that I've done. I've actually delivered. We've got offices in Glasgow in my employer, so I've delivered the mental health first aid training there. In terms of the report, obviously the report itself is more, this is what we want to aspirationally look at over the next 10 years. So I think it's as relevant to...
Everyone's going to benefit, aren't they? I mean, regardless of where you're from. I think the recommendations that the report's made, every employer is going to benefit from adopting some of those, I think, as will their staff.
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. Janine wants to know, should the mental health first aid that you've been talking about, should that be renewed after every 3 years? Is it like first aid at work, or do you use those tools? Are they ongoing?
So the way, and I can, as I said, I'm talking about this on a very personal, reflective basis rather than, I've not asked for permission from mental health first aid. But certainly the way I do it is, because you do it with physical first aid, we do mental health first aid light, which is a one-day course, and we're using that as a refresher. Also, to be perfectly honest, the way I've done it, because I'm an instructor, looking at our employees, I've been able to customize some web page, some intranet pages on our intranet to help to support our mental health first aiders, and we've even got it so that our mental health first aiders actually talk to one another and reflect back, partly to help their own kind of resilience, but as well just to share ideas, all obviously in a massively confidential way.
Do you find that you pick up on different stuff every time you're delivering the training?
Absolutely. You kind of learn something every time you do it. I'm obviously well informed in terms of mental health, but as well as that, the light bulb moment I mentioned, every single session I've done has had quite a profound emotional impact on the people coming. So at times it can be quite overwhelming temporarily for some that attend, but certainly by the end of the course, they're enthusiastic about having the conversation. They feel I've had some people come along who can reflect on their own family in terms of some of the stories that get shared and some of the things that go through, and you see them coming almost to more of an understanding in how it's impacted different family members. So yeah, it's massively rewarding to deliver. It can be.
It's probably
the most. Yeah, it does, and it's opened up the conversation. It's very kind of emotionally demanding on yourself to deliver, but as well, very, very rewarding.
Steve wants to know, and you have covered this actually a little bit, but how the proposed mental health standards match with the HSE stress management standards.
So obviously, I'll flip back up. So there's the six standards. So the HSE ones are obviously a demand, control, support, role, change, relationship, and they are all, the demands of work, how much control you have over your job, the support that you get from the organisation, what kind of change management your organisation does, etc.
Yeah. It's just taking it further, isn't it?
Absolutely. So I think almost the HSE management standards fall within the first 3 points here. So you're producing, you're implementing, you're communicating the plan based on, in part, what the HSE's done, and also based on, as I've said, what you're up for. You want to develop that mental health awareness. All of that drops out to the 6 HSE ones as much as these 6. And I think that awareness can come mainly from training, but also about being open and honest. I think you've got to train your leaders to be able to have conversations, or train some kind of a resource like mental health first aiders, where that can support you. And then I think the third one also that we've got here drops out of the first 2. If you're going to encourage open conversations by the fact that you've communicated it and that you've trained it. So I very much think these 6 from Thriving at Work really support the great work that the HSE has done over the past few years. But I think it just broadens it to the idea that you need to manage the whole person, not just focus on what can we do around that person's job.
Yeah, Sandra's just written in and said that she works in construction and has had instigated the mental health first aid there, and it had a massive impact. And she's going to look into bring it into her new company, so she's totally supportive of it. John wants to know, he says, we had a situation where a team member had a mental health issue, and we made what we thought were reasonable adjustments, but it put an extra load on the rest of the team, and then it caused the rest of the team extra stress. How can you reduce that sort of effect?
It's always interesting with mental health and team members. I think because you've not got a bandage wrapped around something or a plaster cast on something, sometimes people struggle understanding why others have got adjustments and they haven't. And obviously I'm not saying that's the case here, but I have seen that, and I think possibly the best way of doing it is just being very open and honest with the people that you're making the adjustments to support a colleague, in the same way that you would make similar. Obviously, you'd never do the exact same for different people. It's all based on the circumstances, but you're making them temporarily, because everything you do is time bound, and you can never say this adjustment's forever. But we're temporarily assisting a colleague, so that we can support them. Sometimes you have to look at what in a team can be potentially relaxed or altered while you're doing that as well. So is there anything for the rest of the team that you can do to help them be able to absorb the additional work that you've given? But yeah, I think the best way is to just be really open and honest. You've got to obviously engage the person that you're doing the adjustments for, so that they are comfortable with talking about it and kind of sharing their story with others. But yeah, I think the open dialogue is the best way.
Having open conversations with people. I think that's it for our questions. Thanks so much, Tony. That's been so interesting and really helpful. Come and do webinars with us all the time.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much for listening, guys. As always, if you've got any questions that you think of afterwards, if you write in and let us know. If you've got any suggestions about further things you'd like us to concentrate on, things you want us to research, things you would like us to do webinars on, please let us know. And if you want to give us any feedback, it's always welcome. Have a great weekend, and cheers again, Tony. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers, guys. Bye.